Maps once held dragons in uncharted waters and cities of gold on their edges. These forgotten geographers risked everything to draw the very boundaries of our world, blending raw observation with ancient myth. By the end of this journey, you will know the true stories of the pioneers who charted our planet and why their work still echoes in our modern maps. We will uncover how a single flawed map could launch a fleet and why some of the most accurate cartographers were deliberately erased from history. What forgotten name from the edge of the map most deserves to be remembered? Our world began as a small circle of certainty surrounded by an ocean of rumor. The very first to draw its edges were the ancient Greeks and Phoenicians, who sailed their wooden ships beyond the horizon with little more than the stars and stories to guide them. They faced a fundamental problem. How do you map a world you cannot see? Their answer was to blend hard-won observation with the only explanations they had, the powerful myths of their cultures. A stormy sea became the home of a titan, and a frozen northern shore the land of Hyperborean giants who lived beyond the north wind. This was not deception. It was the human mind trying to make sense of the truly unknown. One man who pushed that boundary further than almost any other was Pytheas of Massilia. Around 300 years before the Common Era, this Greek merchant and explorer sailed past the Pillars of Hercules, the known edge of the Mediterranean world, and kept going north. He journeyed for years, eventually reaching a land he called Thule, a place so far north that he reported the sun did not set in summer. He described a frozen sea where water and sky seemed to merge into a solid mass. His account of the midnight sun was so unbelievable to his contemporaries that many branded him a liar for centuries. Yet, in his careful notes on tides and the position of the North Star, we see the flickering birth of scientific geography, struggling to be heard over the roar of popular legend. These early geographers were not just making maps, they were writing the first draft of the world's story. Their charts, a fascinating patchwork of accurate coastlines and mythical interior kingdoms, became the foundational texts for every explorer who followed. The legacy of Pytheas and his peers is not merely in the coastlines they correctly drew, but in the very idea that the world could be measured and understood. They planted a seed of curiosity that would one day fuel entire ages of discovery, proving that the most dangerous thing to bring on a voyage is not a monster from a legend, but a closed mind. Their work set a crucial precedent, blending the seen with the unseen, and forcing us to ask what other truths might be hiding just beyond the edge of the parchment. While Pytheas was dismissed as a liar, his legacy of curiosity did not die. It was simply locked away in monastery libraries and royal courts, preserved by a new kind of mapmaker. In the scriptoria of medieval Europe, monks bent over parchment, painstakingly copying classical texts. They were not explorers themselves, but they became guardians of a fragile flame, the accumulated geographical knowledge of the ancient world. Their maps, known as Mundi, were less about navigation and more about theology. Jerusalem sat at the center of the world, and the entire earth was framed as a divine story, a pathway to salvation. East was often placed at the top, the direction of the rising sun, and the presumed location of the Garden of Eden, a literal earthly paradise drawn on the map's edge. These were spiritual guides as much as geographical ones, blending biblical events and mythical creatures into a single, coherent worldview. Yet across the Mediterranean, a parallel and far more accurate cartographic tradition was flourishing. Arab geographers, building on Greek and Persian knowledge, were meticulously documenting the world. they compiled detailed accounts from merchants traveling the Silk Road and sailors navigating the Indian Ocean, creating records of stunning precision. The greatest fusion of these two worlds occurred in the court of a Norman king in Sicily. King Roger II was a ruler fascinated by knowledge, and he assembled a team of scholars, both Christian and Muslim, for an unprecedented project. He tasked the renowned Arab geographer Al-Idrisi with creating the most accurate map of the world ever seen. For 15 years, Al-Idrisi and his team gathered information. They interviewed travelers, cross-referenced classical texts like Ptolemy's Geographia, and compiled their own data. The result was the Tabula Rogeriana, a massive silver planisphere and an accompanying book of geography. This was not a small parchment for a monk's study. It was a monumental work of science and art, engraved on a solid silver disc weighing hundreds of pounds. The map itself was revolutionary. It depicted the world as a single, connected landmass, showing the source of the Nile with surprising accuracy and detailing the coastlines of Europe and Asia based on first-hand accounts. It was, for its time, the most advanced world map in existence. Yet even Al-Idrisi's masterpiece was not free from the pull of myth. In the Far East, he carefully noted the lands of Gog and Magog, monstrous tribes from biblical and Quranic tradition, penned behind a great wall by Alexander the Great. The earthly paradise was still there, a real place on the edge of the known. This was the essential duality of medieval mapmaking. A single document could be both a scientific instrument of immense value and a spiritual artifact filled with legend. Trade routes were the arteries pumping new information into these maps. Every caravan that arrived from Central Asia, every ship that docked from India, brought back not just spices and silk, but stories and descriptions of distant lands. These accounts were filtered through the lens of the mapmaker's own beliefs, creating a fascinating patchwork of fact and faith. The medieval map was a mirror, reflecting not just the shape of the earth, but the shape of the human mind, a landscape where a merchant's measured mile could sit comfortably beside a vision of paradise. These maps asked a profound question that would echo for centuries. Could a chart of the world ever be truly complete if it only showed what was physically there and not what people believed to be true? The world was about to be torn open, and the maps would never be the same. A new age was dawning in Portugal, driven not by lone adventurers but by a systematic, state-funded campaign to master the oceans. At the heart of this revolution was Prince Henry the Navigator, a man who rarely set foot on a ship himself, but whose vision would redraw the entire globe. He established a center of learning at Sagres, a gathering of the finest astronomers, cartographers, and shipwrights of his time. This was not just a school. It was a laboratory for exploration, a deliberate effort to turn the art of wayfinding into a precise science. Their goal was audacious: to find a sea route around Africa to the legendary spice markets of Asia, bypassing the dangerous and expensive overland caravans. To achieve this, they needed better tools. The caravel was their masterpiece, a ship with triangular lateen sails that could tack against the wind, allowing it to sail far from shore and into the open Atlantic. Then there was the astrolabe, an ancient instrument they perfected for marine use. Imagine a sea captain on a heaving deck, holding up this brass ring to measure the angle of the sun above the horizon. It was a difficult, error-prone process, but it gave them something they never had before: a reliable way to estimate their latitude, to know precisely how far north or south they were on the vast, featureless ocean. This marriage of new ship design and new navigation tools gave explorers a confidence never before possible. They could now venture into the sea of darkness and believe they could find their way back. The success of this system was proven by men like Diogo Cao, Sailing south along the uncharted African coast, he would reach a new headland and erect a stone pillar called a Padrão. These were not mere markers, they were statements of power and possession, carved with the arms of Portugal and a cross, claiming this new land for king and cross. Each pillar was a hard-won piece of data, a fixed point on a map that was slowly, painfully, pushing the edge of the known world further and further south. The inscriptions on those stones were the coordinates of an expanding empire, transforming myth into mapped territory. With every voyage, the monsters that once filled the empty spaces on the map were replaced by the precise lines of a coastline, the careful notation of a river mouth. The world was shrinking, not because it was getting smaller, but because human courage, backed by systematic science, was finally making it measurable. Yet, even as Portuguese caravels charted coastlines with scientific precision, the old myths refused to die. They simply migrated from the blank spaces on the map to the beautifully illustrated margins, woven into the very substance of the parchment. Consider the Hereford Mappa Mundi, a magnificent map from around the year 1300. This is not a tool for navigation, but a sprawling encyclopedia of belief. At its center sits Jerusalem, the spiritual heart of the world, but your eye is drawn to the edges where the known world frays into a realm of wonders and terrors. Here you might find the Ciopods, a tribe of men with a single, giant foot they used for shade, or the Blemii, a people with their faces on their chests. These were not just flights of fancy, they served a profound purpose, filling the terrifying void of the unknown with a tangible, if frightening, geography. They gave shape to the fear of what lay beyond. And then there were the truly legendary lands, places that promised not terror but salvation. For centuries, European maps confidently depicted the kingdom of Prester John, a mythical Christian ruler said to preside over a paradise of wealth and piety somewhere in the vastness of either Asia or Africa. His kingdom was a beacon of hope, a symbol that Christendom was not alone in the world. This was more than a story. It was a geopolitical goal that drove real exploration, prompting emissaries and explorers to search for this allied kingdom, hoping to find a powerful friend against rival empires. Similarly, the lost continent of Atlantis, described by Plato, was often placed just beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a cautionary tale of a perfect society sunk beneath the waves. The frigid north held the land of Hyperborea, a place of eternal sunshine and peace, untouched by sorrow or disease. Why did these legends persist on maps created by intelligent, rational men? The reasons are deeply human. A blank space on a map is an invitation to anxiety. The human mind abhors a vacuum, and it will fill it with either data or dreams. These mythical places served as geographical placeholders, expressions of collective hope, fear, and wonder. They were answers to the question of what could be, making the immense, unknowable world feel smaller, more structured, and more narratively complete. The line between a cartographer and a storyteller was incredibly thin. When an explorer set sail to find the kingdom of Prester John, he was chasing a legend born from ink and parchment. This blurring of myth and reality was not a failure of geography. It was its engine. The dream of finding these places propelled ships across oceans, expanding the known world in the stubborn, relentless pursuit of a beautiful fiction. But the blank spaces on the map were not truly empty. They were already home to people who possessed a deep, intimate knowledge of the land. While European explorers are celebrated in the history books, their survival and success often depended on the guidance of indigenous experts whose contributions have been largely forgotten. These local guides possessed a form of geography written not on parchment, but in the landscape itself. They could read river currents, identify edible plants, and navigate by star patterns that were completely unknown to the outsiders. One of the most famous examples is Sacagawea, the Shoshone woman who became an indispensable member of the Lewis and Clark expedition across North America. She was far more than just an interpreter. When the expedition was starving, she knew which routes to dig for food. When their boat capsized, she calmly rescued their vital journals and scientific instruments. Most crucially, when they reached the headwaters of the Missouri River and desperately needed horses to cross the mountains, it was her reunion with her own brother, a Shoshone chief, that secured the animals that saved the entire mission. Without her, the Corps of Discovery might have simply vanished into the wilderness, another failed expedition. Their maps would have remained blank. Across the globe, a similar story was unfolding on the vast Pacific Ocean. European ships with their advanced instruments were often lost and confused in the island chains of Polynesia. They were met by native navigators who could traverse thousands of miles of open water using methods passed down through generations. These navigators read the ocean like a book. They memorized the precise positions of hundreds of stars. They could sense distant islands by the pattern of swells deflecting around them and by watching the flight paths of specific seabirds at dusk. This knowledge was a sacred science, and when shared, it allowed Europeans to chart the Pacific with an accuracy that was previously impossible. The tragedy is that these collaborators rarely received credit. The maps were published under the names of European captains and cartographers. The deep environmental knowledge provided by indigenous guides was treated as a simple service, not the foundational intelligence that it was. This creates a distorted picture of history, one of solitary European genius rather than a collaborative and often reluctant exchange of knowledge. The true story of mapping the world is not just one of brave explorers heading into the void. It is a story of meetings at the edge, where one person's terra incognita was another person's home. To understand the maps on our walls, we must remember the voices that are missing from them, the guides who literally showed the way. The slow accumulation of coastal charts and the whispered knowledge of guides were about to be forged into something far more powerful, a consistent and repeatable science of location. The old world of hand-copied mappi mundi, each one unique and filled with artistic license, was shattered by a single invention, the printing press. For the first time, a map could be reproduced not just accurately, but identically, thousands of times over. Knowledge of the world was no longer locked in a single monastery or royal court. It could be sold in shops, studied by scholars across continents, and carried onto ships by ordinary captains. This created a new kind of authority, the published map, and with it came an urgent need for a new kind of precision. How could you ensure that a captain in Lisbon and a merchant in Amsterdam were looking at the same coastline? The answer arrived with a Flemish engraver and mathematician named Gerardus Mercator. He was consumed by a very practical problem: how to represent the curved surface of the Earth on a flat sheet of paper in a way that was useful for sailors. His solution, the Mercator projection, was a work of mathematical genius. He imagined the Earth inside a cylinder and then projected the globe's features onto it, unrolling the cylinder to create his map. This method had one spectacular advantage. It preserved angles, meaning a navigator could draw a straight line between 2 points on the map, measure the angle of that line, and set that exact course with their compass. It made ocean navigation infinitely simpler. Yet this revolutionary tool came with a hidden cost. To achieve this straight-line navigation, Mercator had to progressively stretch the sizes of land masses as they moved away from the equator. On his map, Greenland appears larger than Africa, when in reality Africa is 14 times larger. This distortion would shape how generations of people visualize the world, subtly inflating the perceived importance of northern nations while shrinking the equatorial continents. The Mercator projection was a brilliant solution to the problem of navigation, but it created a new problem of perception that lingers to this day. At the same time, on the ground, the science of surveying was transforming the map from a sketch of coastlines into a detailed portrait of the land itself. Teams of surveyors using instruments like the theodolite could now measure angles and distances with breathtaking accuracy, turning the landscape itself into a set of mathematical data. The most ambitious project of this kind was led by the Cassini family in France. Over 4 generations, they undertook the first precise, trigonometric survey of an entire nation. They climbed hills, traversed forests, and measured baselines across miles of countryside to create a network of triangles that covered France. The result was the first truly modern topographic map, showing not just towns and rivers, but the actual shape of the land, its hills and valleys, rendered with empirical rigor. This was the final triumph of measurement over myth. The blank spaces that were once home to sketches of Blemie were now filled with contour lines and elevation data. The map was no longer a story we told about the world. It was becoming a measurable, verifiable, and stunningly accurate picture of the world itself. The age of the forgotten geographer was ending, replaced by the age of the scientist. Yet even as these new maps claimed total authority, a question remained. Could a world captured entirely by day to ever hold the same wonder as a world that still had a few dragons at its edges? Yet even as the Cassinis mapped nations with their precise triangles, other kinds of maps were being drawn, not of political boundaries, but of the living world itself. This work was often done by women who had to navigate a landscape of social restrictions far more treacherous than any uncharted continent. They brought a different focus, documenting the intricate connections between plants, animals, and people, offering an alternative to the grand narratives of conquest and commerce. Maria Sibylla Merian was an artist and naturalist from Frankfurt who, in her early 50s, did something unprecedented. She sold her possessions and with her daughter sailed to the Dutch colony of Suriname in South America. European men at the time were primarily interested in mapping coastlines and cataloging resources for extraction. But Merian was fascinated by the life cycles of insects, a subject most male scientists of her era considered trivial. She spent years in the sweltering heat, patiently observing and painting caterpillars, butterflies, and the specific plants they relied on. Her masterpiece, The Metamorphosis of the Insects of Suriname, was revolutionary. It did not just show isolated specimens, it depicted entire ecosystems on a single page, illustrating how a butterfly's life was inseparable from the leaf it ate and the flower it pollinated. Her work was a map of interdependence, a geographical understanding of life that was decades ahead of its time. Then there is the astonishing story of Jean Barrett. In 1766, she became the first woman to circumnavigate the globe, but she did so disguised as a man, calling herself Jean. She enlisted as the valet and assistant to the naturalist Philibert Commerson on Louis-Antoine de Bougainville's expedition. For years, she maintained her disguise aboard a ship full of men, a feat of incredible physical and mental endurance. When the expedition landed in places like Rio de Janeiro and Tahiti, it was often Barrett, a skilled herbalist, who ventured ashore to collect plant specimens. She is credited with discovering the now famous Bougainvillea vine, naming it after the expedition's commander. Her unique perspective as a woman, even a hidden one, allowed her to gather information from local women in Tahiti about the island's society and customs, knowledge that often remained inaccessible to the male sailors and scientists. The barriers these women faced were immense. They were formally excluded from scientific societies, denied funding, and their work was frequently published under male names or credited to their male colleagues. Their resilience in the face of these obstacles forced them to develop novel methods. They worked in domestic spaces, used art as a scientific tool, and sometimes, like Barrett, had to reinvent their very identities to participate in the great project of discovery. The maps they left us are not of coastlines but of connections. They charted the geography of a leaf, the ecosystem of a jungle clearing, and the social landscape of a foreign culture. By focusing on the local and the living, they provided a crucial counterbalance, reminding us that to truly know a place, you must understand not just its position on a grid, but the life that pulses within its borders. Their forgotten contributions fundamentally enriched our picture of the world, proving that the most accurate map is often the one that shows how everything is linked. Beyond the meticulously surveyed borders of Europe, a different kind of geography was being written, not with instruments but with footsteps. For centuries, the greatest maps of Asia and Africa were not drawn on parchment, but composed in the travelogues of merchants and pilgrims who walked the Silk Road. These chroniclers became the eyes and ears for a world that remained largely unseen by European cartographers, and none were more prolific than the Venetian merchant Marco Polo and the Moroccan scholar Ibn Battuta. Marco Polo spent 24 years traversing Asia, serving in the court of the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan. His book, The Travels of Marco Polo, described a world of breathtaking sophistication that defied European expectations. He wrote of cities with populations in the millions, of paper money, of coal burning for heat, and of a postal system that could relay messages across thousands of miles with astonishing speed. His descriptions of the wealth and power of the East were so detailed, and to many Europeans so unbelievable, that he earned the nickname Il Millini, the man of a million lies. Yet his accounts provided the first reliable glimpse into the political and economic geography of the Far East, planting seeds of ambition that would later drive the age of exploration. A generation later, Ibn Battuta embarked on a journey that would dwarf even Polo's. Driven by a thirst for knowledge and a duty to his faith, he spent nearly 30 years traveling across the entirety of the Islamic world and beyond. His route was a sprawling web that stretched from his home in Tanya to the Swahili coast of Africa, the steppes of Central Asia, the bustling ports of India, and the distant islands of the Maldives. His monumental work, the Rihla, or Journey, is a masterpiece of human geography. He recorded everything from the customs of the court in Delhi to the trading practices in the markets of Mali, from the architectural wonders of Constantinople to the strange social rituals of the societies he encountered. He was a meticulous observer of how people lived within their landscapes, mapping the human world with an ethnographer's eye long before the term existed. The writings of these men were not always perfectly accurate. They relied on translators, their own cultural biases, and the stories of others, leading to embellished tales of men with dog heads or rivers flowing with jewels. But their core value was undeniable. They shattered the monolithic European view of the East as a single, mysterious land of monsters. In its place, they presented a complex tapestry of interconnected kingdoms, each with its own laws, customs, and economies. They revealed that the world was far larger, far more diverse, and far more connected than anyone in medieval Europe had dared to imagine. A merchant in Venice reading Marco Polo could now visualize the route to Cathay. A scholar in Fez studying Ibn Battuta could understand the vastness of the Dar al-Islam, the Muslim world. These accounts did more than just inspire future explorers like Christopher Columbus, who carried a heavily annotated copy of Marco Polo's travels. They fostered a fragile, early form of cross-cultural understanding, proving that the most difficult borders to cross are not made of mountains or rivers, but of ignorance. The true legacy of these Silk Road chroniclers is that they mapped the possibility of connection itself, turning a network of trade routes into a highway for ideas that would ultimately reshape the globe. The blank spaces at the top and bottom of the map were the final, ferocious frontiers. While the Silk Road chroniclers mapped human connection, a different kind of explorer was confronting a world that seemed actively hostile to human life. They sailed toward the poles into a monochrome world of crushing ice, blinding whiteness, and a cold that could shatter steel. The quest to map these frozen edges demanded not just courage, but a complete reinvention of exploration technology. Ships like those of Englishman John Davis, who sought the Northwest Passage in the 1580s, had to be radically reinforced. Their hulls were braced with extra timber to withstand the immense pressure of pack ice, and their bows were sheathed in metal to serve as rams. Sailors traded their loose woolens for layered sealskins and Inuit-inspired fur parkas, learning that survival depended on adopting the technologies of the very people who already called these lands home. Davis meticulously mapped the strait that now bears his name, carefully recording magnetic compass variations that baffled his navigators, providing crucial early data on the Earth's magnetic field. Decades later, the British Admiralty launched a systematic assault on the Antarctic, led by the formidable James Clark Ross. His ships, the Erebus and Terror, were floating fortresses, equipped with steam engines to push through loose ice and internal heating to keep the crews from freezing. Ross pushed further south than any human before, discovering a fiery mountain in a frozen land, which he named Mount Erebus after his ship. He then encountered a sheer wall of ice towering 200 feet above the water, a seemingly endless barrier he christened the Victoria Barrier, now known as the Ross Ice Shelf. This was not just a new coastline, it was a geological feature on a scale previously unimaginable, a continent-sized plate of ice that redefined the very meaning of a land's edge. The discoveries were not only geographical. These expeditions returned with crates of specimens, from unknown species of penguins to bizarre, ghostly fish hauled from the deep, proving that life could thrive in conditions once thought to be utterly sterile. Each iceberg charted, each new species catalogued, was a testament to human resilience. These polar voyages completed the world map in a way no other journey could, proving that even the most desolate and dangerous corners of our planet held secrets worth any risk. They closed the final great chapters of terrestrial discovery, but in doing so, they opened a new one, forcing us to wonder what other invisible frontiers, from the depths of the ocean to the patterns of the climate, still awaited their first cartographers. Long before European ships arrived with their compasses and charts, the Pacific Ocean was already a mapped world. Its cartographers were the Polynesian voyagers, who for centuries had mastered this watery expanse in vessels carved from giant trees. They navigated not by instruments but by a profound literacy of the natural world. They memorized the star paths, knowing which constellations rose and set over specific islands. They could read the subtle patterns of ocean swells, sensing the reflection of a distant landmass in the way the water moved beneath their canoes. They watched the flight of birds at dusk, knowing that certain species would always fly toward land, turning their vessels into living compasses. This knowledge was a sacred science passed down through chants and oral traditions, a living map that existed in memory and song. With this expertise, they undertook voyages of staggering distance, settling islands from Hawaii to New Zealand, creating a web of connection across thousands of miles of open ocean. Their double-hulled canoes were floating ecosystems, carrying families, plants, and animals to populate new worlds. This was not random drift. It was deliberate, skilled colonization on a scale unmatched in human history. When European explorers finally reached the Pacific, they were often lost in its vastness. Captain James Cook, for all his meticulous charting of coastlines and mapping of islands, frequently depended on the very knowledge the Polynesians had perfected. He would take on board Polynesian navigators like Tupaia from Tahiti, who could instantly name and point the way to dozens of islands unknown to the Europeans. Tupper even drew a map from memory for Cook that charted every major island group in a 2,000-mile radius. Cook's own celebrated maps of the Pacific are, in many places, a collaboration, a fusion of European surveying techniques and ancient Polynesian wisdom. This contrast reveals a fundamental truth about the history of geography. There is not one single story of discovery, but many. The European narrative of mapping the world often overshadows the sophisticated systems of knowledge that were already in place. The Polynesian voyagers did not need the printed page to understand the ocean. They carried their maps in their minds, a living geography written in the stars, the waves, and the wind. Their legacy forces us to expand our definition of a mapmaker and to ask what other forms of brilliant, precise knowledge have been forgotten because they were never written down. A legend could launch 1,000 ships, and a fable could found an empire. The most powerful maps of the age were not always the most accurate, but the ones that promised paradise just over the horizon. Mythology did not just decorate the edges of the parchment, it dictated the very routes explorers would take, sending them on desperate, often catastrophic quests for places that existed only in story. Consider the Spanish conquistadors, fueled by tales of the 7 cities of Cibola, said to be built entirely of gold and located somewhere in the deserts of North America. The rumor was so potent that Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led a massive expedition of hundreds of soldiers, slaves, and herds of livestock across the Rio Grande, driven by the vision of untold wealth. What they found were the Zuni Pueblo villages, magnificent multi-story adobe structures that shone in the sun, but were made of mud and straw, not gold. The expedition was a financial and human disaster, yet it forced the Spanish to map vast, unknown stretches of the American Southwest, documenting rivers, canyons, and indigenous civilizations they never knew existed. Similarly, the myth of El Dorado, the golden man who ruled a city of unimaginable riches, lured countless men into the heart of the South American jungle. They endured disease, starvation, and hostile encounters, all for a kingdom of gold that was never there. Yet each failed expedition filled in another piece of the Amazon basin, turning a blank space on the map into a charted, albeit deadly, territory. Even the quest for eternal youth had geographical consequences. The Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, hearing indigenous stories, went in search of the fountain of youth, a spring whose waters could restore vitality. He never found it, of course, but his search led him to the Gulf Stream, a powerful ocean current that would become the highway for all future Spanish shipping, and he gave Florida its name, permanently placing it on the map. Why did these rational men, experienced soldiers and sailors, chase such fantasies? The psychology is profound. A map filled with data is a tool, but a map that hints at paradise is a siren's call. In an age of limited information, a single compelling story could outweigh a mountain of contrary evidence. These myths provided a narrative, a purpose that made the immense suffering and risk of exploration seem worthwhile. They were the ultimate motivational tools, turning the vague goal of discovery into a tangible, glittering prize. The tragic irony is that in their relentless pursuit of fiction, these explorers ended up uncovering a far grander and more complex reality. They were looking for cities of gold, but they found continents. They sought a fountain of youth, but they mapped an ocean current that would empower an empire. The dreams were illusions, but the lands they stumbled upon were utterly real, forever changing the balance of the world. What does it say about us that our greatest leaps into the unknown are so often propelled not by cold calculation, but by the stubborn, beautiful, and sometimes fatal power of a good story? A single line drawn in error on a map could alter the destiny of nations. For centuries, cartographers were haunted by the ghost of a continent that did not exist, a land of immense wealth and size they called Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. The logic seemed unassailable. The great land masses of the northern hemisphere must be balanced by an equally large continent in the south to prevent the world from tipping over. This idea, born from ancient Greek theories of balance, was drawn onto maps as a vast, shadowy shape at the bottom of the world. It was this phantom that led explorers like Pedro Fernandez de Queiroz to land on what he thought was its northern shore in 1606. He named it Australia del Espiritu Santo, claiming it for Spain and believing he had found a new world. In reality, he was on a relatively small island in what we now call Vanuatu. The consequences of this persistent error were immense. It fueled a fierce colonial rivalry, sending Dutch, Spanish, and British ships racing across the Pacific, each hoping to claim the riches of a continent that was, for the most part, nothing but open ocean and ice. The myth was so powerful it even shaped the voyage of Captain James Cook. His secret orders were not just to observe the transit of Venus, but to finally settle the question of Terra Australis. His meticulous mapping of New Zealand and the eastern coast of Australia proved these were not part of a giant southern continent, but the final, fatal blow to the legend did not come until his second voyage, when he sailed deep into the Antarctic Circle, finding only a frozen, desolate sea where the mapmakers had placed a fertile paradise. Across the globe, another stubborn error was taking shape, this time on the western edge of North America. For over a century, California was consistently depicted on European maps as a massive island. The mistake began with a romantic novel and was seemingly confirmed by early explorers who misinterpreted the geography of the Gulf of California. Once this idea was printed and replicated, it became a fact. The California island was a cartographic zombie, a piece of misinformation that refused to die despite mounting evidence to the contrary. Jesuit missionaries who traveled overland and could clearly see it was a peninsula found their first-hand accounts dismissed by armchair geographers in Europe who trusted the printed map more than the eyewitness on the ground. This error had real-world consequences. It distorted the strategic understanding of the Pacific coast, complicating Spanish colonial administration and misleading sailors about the nature of the coastline they were navigating. Perhaps no faulty map lured more men to their doom than those promising a northwest passage. For 400 years, the dream of a direct sea route across the top of North America to the spice markets of Asia drove expedition after expedition into a lethal labyrinth of ice. The maps they carried were often works of hopeful fiction, showing wide, navigable straits where only frozen, impassable channels existed. The most infamous of these doomed voyages was that of Sir John Franklin in 1845. His two ships, the Erebus and Terror, were the most advanced vessels of their time, equipped with steam engines and reinforced hulls. They carried 3 years' worth of provisions and 129 men. They also carried maps that suggested a clear, if narrow, path through the archipelago of northern Canada. The ships vanished into the ice. Subsequent search parties, relying on the same flawed charts, found only fragments of the story, a skeleton here, an abandoned lifeboat there. The entire crew perished, victims of starvation, disease, and the brutal cold, all while searching for a passage that, for all practical purposes, did not exist. Their tragedy, born from a cartographic mirage, finally provided the grim, accurate data that would correctly map the Arctic, proving the passage was so choked with ice as to be commercially useless. The relentless pursuit of these geographical ghosts reveals a profound truth about our relationship with the unknown. An error on a map is not a simple mistake. It is a compass needle pointing toward obsession, a siren song that can lead to ruin or revelation. The blank spaces filled with conjecture became engines of exploration, pushing humanity to sail further, see more, and ultimately to correct the very dreams that first launched the ships. The maps have finally shed their dragons, but the age of discovery is far from over. We have simply traded parchment for pixels, and the new cartographers are scientists who map invisible worlds of data. The digital revolution began with satellites gazing down from the void, capturing every contour of our planet in stunning detail. Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, transformed this raw data into living maps. A GIS map is not a static picture, it is a series of transparent layers. One layer might show ancient Roman roads, another the current flow of internet traffic, and a third the migration paths of monarch butterflies. With a click, you can see how these completely different worlds overlap and interact, revealing patterns no one could have seen before. This is the new geography, a science of connections that makes the old Mundi look like simple sketches. Yet, even in this modern era, pioneers were overlooked. Marie Tharp was a geologist working in the 1950s, a time when women were not allowed on research ships. While her male colleagues collected sonar data from the Atlantic, she stayed in the office, patiently plotting their thousands of depth readings onto large sheets of paper. Line by line, a hidden world emerged beneath her hands. She revealed a massive, continuous canyon running down the center of the Atlantic Ocean, a giant rift valley. Her colleague initially dismissed it as girl talk, thinking such a feature was geologically impossible. But Marie Tharp was right. Her meticulous map of the ocean floor became the single most compelling visual evidence for the then controversial theory of plate tectonics, proving the continents themselves are in constant slow motion. She mapped the very engine of the planet, yet for decades her name was a footnote. Now, digital tools are allowing us to correct the historical record. Scholars can scan fragile, centuries-old maps and overlay them with modern satellite imagery, analyzing the precise distortions and accuracies of forgotten cartographers. We can computationally trace the flow of geographical knowledge from one culture to another, rediscovering the contributions of indigenous guides, overlooked scholars, and women like Tharp who were written out of the story. The new frontier is not a blank space on a map, but the vast wilderness of information we have already collected. The next generation of explorers will be data detectives, sifting through this digital landscape to find the hidden stories and unseen connections. They are mapping the human genome, the neural pathways of the brain, and the dark matter webs of the cosmos. The quest remains the same, to push beyond the edge of the known. But now the most uncharted territories are not made of land or water, but of knowledge itself. A map could be a peace treaty written in ink and gold. In the bustling port cities of the medieval Mediterranean, where Arabic, Latin, and Catalan echoed through the markets, cartographers were creating documents that were more than mere charts. They were intricate tapestries of shared knowledge, woven from threads pulled from every corner of the known world. The most stunning example of this is the Catalan Atlas, created in 1375 by the Jewish cartographer Abraham Cresques. Commissioned by the King of Aragon as a gift for the French court, this atlas was a masterpiece of cultural fusion. It drew heavily on the work of Arab geographers like Al-Idrisi, incorporating their accurate depictions of Africa and Asia. It used Islamic star charts for navigation and featured place names in multiple languages. The map was not just a tool for a Christian king. It was a bridge consciously built from the best information available across cultural and religious lines. These maps served as silent diplomats. A ruler gazing upon the Catalan Atlas did not see a world divided by faith, but a single, interconnected planet, its trade routes traced like veins of silver and gold across the parchment. The artistic styles themselves reflected this exchange. European heraldic shields might sit beside illustrations of Arab dhows and caravans led by African traders. The Sahara was not an empty barrier, but a populated space with detailed depictions of the Mali Empire and its fabulously wealthy ruler, Mansa Musa, seated on his throne holding a golden orb. This was a radical act of recognition, placing a sub-Saharan African kingdom squarely on the world stage as a major power. By incorporating these diverse perspectives, the mapmaker was doing more than just collecting data. He was fostering a form of early global consciousness. A scholar in Paris could now visualize the source of gold in West Africa, the spice routes of the Indian Ocean, and the court of the Great Khan in China, all on a single, coherent surface. This visual representation of a connected world challenged the insular, faith-centered Mundi and hinted at a more holistic, scientific understanding of geography. Of course, these exchanges were not without their biases and power dynamics. The very act of mapping another culture was often a step toward controlling it. Yet, in their highest form, these collaborative maps became catalysts for mutual curiosity. They presented the world not as a collection of isolated monologues, but as a potential conversation. They asked their viewers to consider that true understanding began not with conquest, but with the simple, profound act of seeing the world through another's eyes. Yet even the most beautiful map could be a prelude to dispossession. For every line drawn by an explorer, there was a community whose world was being irrevocably redrawn without their consent. The tools of geography, the compass and the theodolite, became instruments of power in the service of empire. Nowhere was this more brutally clear than in the scramble for Africa. In 1884, European powers gathered in Berlin around a map of a continent they barely understood. With rulers and pens, they carved Africa into geometric territories, drawing straight lines that cut through ancient kingdoms, homelands, and ecosystems. These maps, created in distant European capitals, were not based on geographical or cultural reality. They were legal fictions made real by force, justifying the theft of land and the exploitation of people and resources. A map became a deed of ownership, and the cartographer, whether they intended it or not, became an agent of colonization. The ethical dilemma for the geographer was profound. Was their primary duty to the abstract ideal of accuracy, or to the human consequences of their work? For centuries, the answer was often the former, with mapping serving the goals of state power and commercial gain. The very act of naming a mountain or a river was an act of possession, overwriting indigenous names that held generations of memory and meaning. This legacy of mapping as control extends into our modern world. Today, the satellites that give us pinpoint navigation also enable constant surveillance. The same GPS data that guides an ambulance can be used to track a person's movements without their knowledge, eroding privacy. Digital maps created by giant corporations hold immense power over how we see contested spaces. A border drawn on one company's global map can legitimize a political claim or erase a community's existence, all with a software update. The line between a cartographic standard and a political statement has become dangerously thin. So what is the ethical responsibility of the mapmaker today? It begins with acknowledging that no map is truly neutral. Every cartographic choice, from what to include to what to leave blank, is a value judgment. The new frontiers of ethical mapping involve collaboration and restitution. Projects are now underway where cartographers work directly with indigenous communities to create maps that incorporate traditional place names and sacred sites, restoring a layer of history that was deliberately erased. To chart a territory is to wield a unique kind of power, the power to define reality for others. The question we must now ask is not just how to map the world, but for whom and for what purpose. The most accurate map may be the one that recognizes not only the shape of the land, but the weight of its history and the rights of its people. The deep ocean floor remains a more alien landscape than the surface of Mars. We have mapped the moon in higher resolution than our own seafloor, leaving vast canyons and towering underwater mountains waiting in perpetual darkness. This is the new Terra Incognita, a world explored not by wooden ships but by submersibles and robotic rovers. Pioneers like oceanographer Sylvia Earle descend into these trenches, their lights illuminating creatures and ecosystems that defy imagination. Her work is not just about discovery, but a race against time to document these fragile worlds before they are altered by deep-sea mining or pollution. She is mapping a vanishing frontier, charting the very ecosystems that sustain our planet's health. On land, the uncharted territories have shrunk to isolated pockets, yet they still exist. Deep within the Amazon rainforest or the labyrinthine cave systems of Vietnam, teams of modern cartographers are at work. They use laser scanners to map vast caverns in 3 dimensions, revealing chambers no human has ever seen. Drones fly over impenetrable jungles, creating detailed topographic maps that show the hand of ancient, lost civilizations hidden beneath the canopy. These modern explorers are often scientists and conservationists, their maps serving as crucial tools for protecting these last wild places from destruction. The drive to discover has even leapt into the digital realm. We are now mapping cyberspace itself, tracing the sprawling connections of the internet as if it were a new continent. Data scientists create stunning visualizations of global information flow, showing pulses of light representing trillions of messages and transactions. Virtual reality allows us to step inside these maps, to explore a human cell or walk the ancient streets of Rome as they were 2,000 years ago. We are mapping the brain's neural pathways and the invisible structure of dark matter. The blank spaces are no longer on parchment, but in our understanding of complex systems, from the global climate to the spread of ideas. The fundamental human urge remains unchanged. We are still the species that must know what lies beyond the next ridge, whether that ridge is made of rock, water, or data. The modern mapmaker's quest proves that the age of discovery did not end when the last coastline was drawn. It simply evolved, asking us to look deeper and see the infinite mysteries that still surround us. Their names may have faded from our atlases, but the world we navigate today was drawn by their hands. The forgotten geographers gave us more than just coastlines, they gave us a framework for global connection. Their maps became the silent engines of trade, guiding merchant fleets along newly charted sea lanes that wove the continents together. The very concept of a global economy, of spices from the Moluccas reaching tables in London, was born from the courage of those who first mapped the winds and currents. This geographical knowledge did more than fill royal coffers, it fueled the human imagination. Jules Verne's epic tale, Around the World in 80 Days, hinges on the precise network of steamship routes and railway lines that these mapmakers made possible. The sense of vast, unexplored wilderness in the stories of Robert Louis Stevenson and Joseph Conrad drew directly from the blank spaces those geographers were still filling in. Even the fantastical landscapes of J.R.R. Tolkien, with his meticulously mapped Middle-earth, echo the tradition of the medieval Mundi, where every forest and mountain held the potential for legend. This is their cultural legacy, a world that felt knowable yet still wondrous, a canvas for our greatest stories, preserving their fragile parchment maps and scattered journals is not merely an academic exercise, it is an act of safeguarding our own origin story. Institutions like the British Library and the Library of Congress are now using multispectral imaging to read faded ink on documents centuries old, recovering lost names and notes. Digital archives are making these treasures accessible to anyone with an internet connection, allowing a student in Buenos Aires to study Al-Idrisi's work as closely as a scholar in Oxford. When we reintroduce figures like Marie Tharp or Abraham Cresques into the historical narrative, we do more than correct a record. We enrich our understanding of how knowledge is built, not in isolation, but through collaboration, perseverance, and often through the quiet dedication of those written out of the official story. Their lives remind us that discovery is a human endeavor, full of wrong turns and stubborn myths, but always driven forward by an insatiable curiosity about what lies beyond the horizon. By remembering these forgotten geographers, we honor the very spirit of exploration, and we pass a powerful torch to the next generation, inspiring them to map their own uncharted worlds, whether they be in the deep ocean, the far reaches of space, or the intricate landscapes of the human heart. A coiled sea serpent, its scales meticulously inked onto vellum, was more than a decoration. It was a direct warning to any captain daring to sail too far from known waters. The Carta Marina, a stunning map of Scandinavia from the 16th century, is a perfect gallery of these cartographic nightmares, alongside its shockingly accurate coastlines of Norway and Sweden. The ocean teems with life. A monstrous lobster seizes a sailor in its claw, while a whale-like beast spouts water from a fearsome, tusked mouth. These were not random flights of fancy. Each creature served a purpose, translating sailors' whispered tales of treacherous whirlpools, unpredictable currents, and deadly reefs into a visual language every mariner could understand. The map told them where the real, physical dangers lay, using the grammar of myth. Beyond the practical, these beasts gave a face to the profound psychological terror of the void. The vast, empty stretches of the Atlantic were not merely unknown, they were actively hostile, populated by leviathans that embodied nature's uncontrollable fury. In the far north, maps often featured griffins, guardians of hidden gold and forbidden knowledge. Their presence marked territories that were not just uncharted, but unconquerable, places where human ambition would be tested by ancient, magical forces. These illustrations were a collective confession of human limitation, acknowledging that some corners of the world were meant to remain wild and wondrous. They satisfied a deep need to personify the forces of nature, to turn the abstract fear of the unknown into a creature that could, in theory, be faced and fought. The maps that featured them were therefore deeply honest, admitting that the world was only partly a physical reality. The other part was a story, a dreamscape of our deepest anxieties and most fervent hopes. What does it say about us that we once needed dragons at the edge of the map to feel that the world was complete? The stars were the first compass, a fixed clockwork of lights against which every earthly distance could be measured. Ancient geographers understood that to map the earth, they first had to chart the heavens, and no one did this more systematically than the Greek astronomer Hipparchus. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, he looked up at the night sky and saw a celestial grid. He proposed that any location on Earth could be pinpointed using two simple coordinates, latitude and longitude. Latitude was the easier one to grasp. By measuring the angle of the North Star above the horizon, a sailor could know exactly how far north they had traveled. Longitude was the fiendishly difficult puzzle. It required knowing the precise time difference between your current location and a fixed starting point, a problem that would stump navigators for another 2,000 years. Yet Hipparchus laid the foundational idea, transforming the Earth from a featureless plane into a measurable sphere crisscrossed by invisible lines. This cosmic perspective did not just provide coordinates. It infused the very substance of maps with celestial meaning. Medieval and Renaissance cartographers often decorated their works with intricate astrological charts in the margins. The signs of the zodiac were not mere decoration. They were a direct link between the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the Earth. A mapmaker might assign the influence of Aries to Western Europe or have Pisces rule over the Mediterranean Sea, believing the stars above directly shaped the character and destiny of the lands below. This created a living, breathing map, one where terrestrial geography was woven into a larger cosmic fabric. The universe and the Earth were not separate realms, but a single, interconnected system. Then, in the early 17th century, a new instrument shattered the old celestial spheres. When Galileo Galilei pointed his telescope at the heavens, he saw mountains on the moon and moons orbiting Jupiter. These discoveries did more than revolutionize astronomy. They provided geographers with a more precise cosmic clock. Jupiter's moons, eclipsing at predictable intervals, became a celestial timekeeper visible from anywhere on Earth, offering the first potential solution to the longitude problem. The telescope revealed that the universe was vaster and more complex than anyone had dreamed, which in turn expanded the perceived boundaries of our own world. If the cosmos was so immense, how much more of our own planet remained to be discovered? Every improvement in astronomical observation directly refined the art of geography, proving that to truly know our world, we have always had to look beyond it. A forgotten map can rewrite history in a single, contested line. In the 1960s, a document known as the Vinland map surfaced, stunning the academic world. It depicted a landmass west of Greenland labeled as Vinland, seemingly proving that Norse explorers had charted North America long before Columbus. The map was hailed as a revolutionary discovery, a tangible link to the Viking sagas. But controversy followed instantly. The ink used for its lines was analyzed and found to contain a modern compound, anatase, suggesting a clever 20th century forgery designed to deceive collectors and rewrite the history books. The debate rages to this day, with some scholars arguing the anatase could be a contaminant, a ghost from a later restoration effort. The mystery of the Vinland map reminds us that every rediscovered artifact carries two stories, the history it purports to tell and the history of its own journey back to light. Another perplexing document is the Piri Reis map, drawn by an Ottoman admiral in 1513. A fragment of a larger world chart, it survives by pure chance, rediscovered in a Turkish palace in 1929. What makes it extraordinary is its depiction of the Atlantic coastline of South America with uncanny accuracy, and a suggestion of a northern land that some believe represents Antarctica, centuries before its official discovery. How could Piri Reis have known this? His own notes provide the answer. He compiled his map from 20 source charts, including what he called a map from the time of Alexander the Great, and most tantalizingly, charts from Christopher Columbus himself, which are now lost to history. The Piri Reis map is not a single vision, but a palimpsest of forgotten geographies, a mosaic of knowledge that has since vanished. To read such a map is to peer through a keyhole into a lost library of the world. The key to unlocking these secrets now lies in advanced technology. Multispectral imaging can see beneath the surface of a manuscript, revealing erased texts, earlier drafts, and hidden annotations. A seemingly blank piece of parchment might once have held a ship's log, its ghostly words brought back to life by cameras that see in wavelengths invisible to the human eye. This is the patient work of librarians, archivists, and historians, who act as detectives and guardians of these fragile treasures. They preserve the physical object in climate-controlled rooms, handling the brittle pages with gloves, while digital tools allow them to share the map with the world without risking its decay. The thrill of their work is the possibility of a new discovery hidden in plain sight, a single note in a margin that changes the entire narrative of a famous voyage. These recovered maps are more than just old paper, they are time machines. They force us to reconsider the paths of exploration, revealing networks of knowledge that were far more extensive and interconnected than we ever realized. Each rediscovered line is a testament to a human mind that tried to capture the world, and a reminder that our history is still being drawn, one recovered fragment at a time. The same relentless drive that pushed a Polynesian navigator into the empty Pacific also propelled an astronaut into the silent void of space. This urge to explore is a fundamental thread in the human psyche, a complex tapestry woven from strands of insatiable curiosity, naked ambition, and profound spiritual yearning. Psychologists might frame this through Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where once our basic requirements for food and safety are met, we strive for higher purposes like self-actualization, the desire to become our most capable and fulfilled selves. For an explorer, this pinnacle is often reached only by standing on a precipice no one has ever seen before, by pushing the limits of human endurance and knowledge. The quest for discovery is a powerful form of self-creation. Consider the British explorer Ernest Shackleton, whose ship, the Endurance, was crushed by Antarctic ice. Stranded for months on frozen floes with his crew, facing almost certain death, his primary drive shifted from discovery to pure survival. Yet even in that desperate struggle, the psychological need for purpose and mastery never left him. His legendary journey in a small lifeboat across 800 miles of stormy ocean to fetch help was not just a physical feat. It was a monumental act of will, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to surrender to the void. Similarly, the medieval monk Xuanzang traveled from China to India and back over 17 years, braving bandits and deserts, driven not by gold but by a spiritual need to retrieve sacred Buddhist texts. His economic gain was negligible, his comfort non-existent, yet his inner fulfillment reshaped the religious landscape of an entire civilization. This timeless urge has not faded, it has simply found new frontiers. The deep sea diver descending into the crushing blackness of the Mariana Trench experiences the same heart-pounding mix of terror and wonder as a Renaissance sailor approaching an uncharted coastline. The software engineer mapping the intricate pathways of artificial intelligence is navigating a digital wilderness as vast and unknown as any continent. We are hardwired to answer the siren call of the horizon, whether that horizon is made of water, rock, or pure data. The greatest explorations have always been a mirror held up to our own souls, asking us not just what lies out there, but what we are truly capable of when we choose to journey into the unknown. A geographer's most vital tool was not a compass, but a willingness to listen. Beyond the lines they drew on parchment, these pioneers were building fragile bridges between worlds, acting as diplomats, linguists, and students of the human landscape. Their success depended on an intimate understanding of the people who inhabited the lands they sought to chart. Learning local languages and customs was not a courtesy, it was the very foundation of accurate mapping. One of history's greatest exemplars of this was the Chinese Buddhist monk Xuanzang. In the 7th century, driven by a quest for sacred texts, he embarked on a 17-year pilgrimage from China to India and back. His journey was an epic act of cultural immersion. He did not just pass through kingdoms, he lived in them, studying at the great University of Nalanda, debating with scholars, and meticulously recording the social structures, economies, and religious practices of every region he visited. His detailed chronicles, later compiled as the Great Tang Records on the Western regions, became an invaluable geographical and ethnographical treasure. They provided China with its first clear, nuanced picture of Central Asia and India, mapping a spiritual and intellectual corridor that would enrich both cultures for centuries. These cross-cultural exchanges were a delicate dance of mutual learning and occasional, sometimes profound, misunderstanding. A geographer might learn from a local guide about a sacred mountain, only to misinterpret its spiritual significance as a marker of a political border. A story about a distant tribe with unique customs could be faithfully recorded but stripped of its context, transforming a complex society into a cartographic curiosity for a European audience. The accuracy of the resulting map hinged entirely on the geographer's empathy and intellectual humility. Those who approached new cultures with an open mind, like Xuanzang, produced documents of stunning insight. They understood that a river was not just a blue line, but a source of life, a spiritual entity, and a highway for trade, all at once. Their maps became living documents, reflecting not just the lay of the land, but the heartbeat of its people. In this delicate work of translation and trust, the greatest discovery was often not a new coastline, but a new perspective. A sudden shift in the climate could strand an entire fleet or open a new passage to untold wealth. The environment was an invisible hand guiding the course of exploration, its influence so profound that the rise and fall of colonies often hinged on a few degrees of temperature. Between the 14th and 19th centuries, the Northern Hemisphere was gripped by a period of intense cooling known as the Little Ice Age. For the Norse settlers who had established thriving communities in Greenland, this shift was catastrophic. They had arrived during the medieval warm period, when the island's fjords were green and pastures could support their Scandinavian way of life, complete with dairy farming and cattle. But as the cold deepened, the sea ice expanded, cutting off their vital trade routes back to Iceland and Norway. The growing season shortened and their livestock starved. They were trapped between an advancing ice sheet and a frozen ocean, their fate sealed not by a lack of courage, but by a changing climate they could not control. Their settlements, once vibrant, were slowly abandoned, leaving only ruins and a haunting question about our own vulnerability to the weather. Yet the very same climatic forces that doomed the Norse in the north created opportunities elsewhere. The persistent search for a northwest passage was driven by the hope that the Little Ice Age's extensive ice might have receded enough to reveal a navigable channel. Explorers like Henry Hudson gambled their lives on these shifting conditions, only to find the ice was still an impassable, grinding wall. To navigate a world governed by such powerful forces, geographers and sailors had to become masters of pattern. In the Indian Ocean, the entire rhythm of trade was dictated by the monsoon winds. For 6 months of the year, the winds blew steadily from the southwest, carrying ships from Africa toward India. Then they reversed, blowing from the northeast for the other 6 months, carrying those same ships home. Arab and Indian merchants did not fight this cycle, they embraced it. Their voyages were meticulously timed, their ships designed to harness these powerful, predictable winds. This was not a suggestion from nature, it was a command. To ignore the monsoon was to be lost at sea forever. These early navigators developed sophisticated methods of weather prediction, reading the subtle signs in the clouds, the swell of the waves, and the behavior of birds to anticipate storms and shifting winds. Their knowledge was a form of deep-time geography, an understanding that the map was not a static image, but a living system that breathed with the seasons. The forgotten geographers who documented these patterns were not just drawing coastlines, they were charting the very pulse of the planet. Their work forces us to see history not as a sequence of human decisions alone, but as a constant dialogue between our ambitions and the Earth's immense power. As we now face a new era of climatic change, their legacy asks us a pressing question. Will we be like the Norse, clinging to a world that is vanishing, or will we learn to read the new patterns and navigate the uncertain frontiers ahead? The same grid of invisible lines that divided the Earth also mapped the heavens. Ancient scholars saw the cosmos and the planet as a single, interconnected system, and their tools for understanding one were immediately applied to the other. The towering figure in this unified science was Claudius Ptolemy, a Greek astronomer and geographer working in Alexandria during the 2nd century. His two great works, the Almagest on astronomy and the Geographia on cartography, were two sides of the same coin. In the Almagest, he laid out a complex geocentric model of the universe, with the Earth fixed at the center and the planets, sun, and stars revolving around it in a series of intricate circles. This was not just a theory of the skies, it was a mathematical framework. He used the same principles of geometry and coordinate systems to plot the positions of stars as he did to plot the locations of cities. His Geographia provided instructions for creating a world map using a grid of latitude and longitude, a direct translation of celestial coordinates to the terrestrial sphere. For over 1,000 years, his work was the absolute authority, a testament to the power of an interdisciplinary mind. This partnership between earth and sky was visible in the beautiful atlases of the Renaissance. A world map would often be flanked by detailed charts of the constellations, and navigational manuals contained precise star charts alongside coastal profiles. To know your position on the rolling sea, you had to first find your place in the fixed tapestry of the night. The same compass that drew a circle on a map could be used to measure the angles between stars. This unified view fostered a profound, if sometimes flawed, understanding. Medieval mapmakers often inscribed the zodiac around the edges of their Mundi, believing the celestial forces governed the character of the lands below. The influence of Aries might be felt in the temperament of Western Europe, while the constellation of Pisces was thought to rule the Mediterranean Sea. This created a living, breathing cosmos where every earthly feature was connected to a celestial counterpart. The collaboration between geographers and astronomers expanded the very concept of space, making the immense and the infinite feel just a little more knowable. It asked a fundamental question that we still grapple with today. Can we ever truly understand our own world without first seeking our place in the universe? The next map of the world might be drawn not by a satellite but by a quantum computer. We stand at the brink of a new age of discovery, where artificial intelligence can sift through petabytes of geological data, climate records, and ancient texts to predict the location of lost cities buried beneath the sand or submerged under the sea. Imagine an eye cross-referencing a merchant's diary from the Silk Road with satellite radar imagery, pinpointing the possible remains of a caravanserai that has been invisible for 1,000 years. Quantum sensors could detect infinitesimal gravitational variations, mapping entire subterranean river systems or the foundations of forgotten settlements from orbit, revealing a hidden layer of the planet's history. The new frontiers are not just physical. We are beginning to map the intricate geographies of microbial ecosystems, charting the vast, unseen continents of bacteria and fungi that govern the health of our soil and oceans. These are the invisible kingdoms that truly rule our world, and their cartographers will be biologists wielding genetic sequencers as their compasses. Even more abstract are the virtual worlds being built in the digital ether. The metaverse already has its own topography, its own economies, and its own social landscapes, all demanding a new breed of geographer to document its evolving territories. Who will be the forgotten geographers of this new era? They are the data scientists uncovering climate patterns in ice core records, the citizen archaeologists using satellite apps to spot potential dig sites from their living rooms, and the game designers crafting immersive digital landscapes. The spirit of exploration is no longer confined to a ship's deck. You can contribute to this grand project by geotagging historical photos in an online archive, by mapping your local park's biodiversity with a smartphone, or by simply being a curious traveler who documents the stories of a place. The greatest uncharted territory is the vast expanse of human knowledge, and every one of us holds a piece of the puzzle. The adventure did not end when the last coastline was drawn, it simply evolved. The next layer of the map is waiting for your hand to trace its lines. Their stories are a testament to courage drawn in ink and curiosity measured in miles. From Pytheas braving the midnight sun to Tharp mapping the ocean's hidden valleys, these forgotten geographers did more than chart coastlines. They expanded the very idea of what was possible, proving that the greatest explorations begin not with a map but with a question. Their legacy is a world woven together by threads of trade, understanding, and shared knowledge, a reminder that every line they drew was ultimately a bridge between cultures. This spirit of discovery is not a relic of the past. It lives on in the local historian uncovering a neighborhood's lost story, the citizen scientist tracking bird migrations, and the student gazing at the stars. Each of us can be a cartographer of our own world, charting connections and seeking out the unknown in our communities. Thank you for joining this expedition into the past. We leave you with a final question to share in the comments. Which of these forgotten names from the edge of the map most inspires your own journey of discovery? Subscribe for more adventures into the unknown, and may your own curiosity always lead you beyond the